Hello! Here we are. This is Kenneth Nichols on the Great Writers Steal podcast. Today, Jordan Rothacker. His book, And Wind Will Wash Away, from Deeds Publishing, a nice little company in Athens, Georgia, not Ohio. We are going to talk about great literature with a fascinating writer who has been on a fascinating journey through many places. He's met a lot of very cool people, had a lot of cool teachers, and we're going to hear all about what he does and why. We'll talk about writing communities and how other people can improve our work. Most importantly, we'll have a lot of fun with a very cool guy. So sit back, pour yourself a colortini, and watch the colors fly through the air. We're right back after this. Give books as gifts, heal deep rifts at indie stores. Don't shoplift. Make more readers with Grisham and King. Show your friends all the joy books can bring. Authors need every dime. Lattes don't last a lifetime. Here we are with Jordan Rothacker, discussing his new book, And Wind Will Wash Away, from Deeds Publishing. Jordan, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Ken. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. I found your book very, very interesting, especially because of the subject matter and the way that you dealt with things. The book is described. Oh, could you give us your elevator pitch for the book?
I guess the quick would be it's a literary detective story through the religious underbelly of Atlanta. That's the good one-liner right there.
Well, I note in the materials that Deeds Publishing has, out in all the description, they describe it as part mystery, part police procedural, part theological treatise, and part love story. And Wind Will Wash Away is a debut novel like no other. How do you kind of balance the different genres?
Well, I was really thinking of, when I was writing this, the time of writing a detective story with hopefully trying to be free of, kind of genre pigeonholes. I was trying for naturalism at the same time as trying to write, a story that followed a detective, trying to understand a mystery, which eventually kind of got at what I thought maybe the heart of mystery in general. So people kind of calling it like a neo-noir and things like that, I think might come from the fact that I was trying for as much, naturalism as possible, trying for as much reality as possible while still being this, mystery story. In mind, I did have things like Twin Peaks and some of Murakami's work, Haruki Murakami. So there was this kind of touch of like of the surreal that kept coming into how I was going about this. But I was just trying to find my own path, I guess, maybe through these different tropes or genres, as you were saying.
Yeah, one of the things that I've really been pushing on my site and in my own work is the balance between entertainment and all of that literary fancy pants type stuff.
Mm-hmm, sure.
What was your philosophy as you composed a book that it's not an 80-page hard-boiled thriller that is kind of accessible to everybody, but it's also not inaccessible. How did you balance those two concerns?
As a teenager, I was actually really, really enamored by James Joyce. I was a member of the International James Joyce Foundation when I was 17, and I admit that something like Ulysses, or even more so Finnegan's Wake, are works that are maybe a little alienating in the way he goes about form. Even though, of course, he's trying for a very deep sense of realism or naturalism. And so there is a lot of that influence that runs through this book, a lot of maybe puns and jokes and symbolism that I've embedded in there for myself and for maybe others who pick up on it. but I still wanted to tell a story. So the main form influences I kept looking at was to, reread um, Dickens or George Eliot or Zola, and to kind of look at, in writing my first novel, to look at the, golden age of the novel, the 19th century, and these very readable, human stories, looking at going back to Middlemarch and reading a lot of Zola at the time, to to be able to tell a story that would still feel human, still feel real, have rounded characters, while at the same time, finding a way to embed the kind of I don't know, maybe intellectual apparatus that I still enjoy having also in a novel.
Very cool. Tell me about Detective Wind, the protagonist of the novel.
Mm.
You've deliberately entwined his journey and his profession with what happens in the novel. Tell us about how you construct him, how you feel about him.
Um, well, he's a character that I spent 3 years actively working on this novel with. So I like him. I'll give you that. I mean, in regards to how I feel about him, he's also trying to make a real character. I'm hopefully in making him. Hopefully, he does come off as off the page and real to the reader. And part of that was to make sure that he's flawed. He definitely to me represented this kind of you know in playing with classical binaries, this kind of masculine rationality that was kind of stubborn and maybe unbending in this desire for a very rigid idea of truth, and a rational solution to everything. And so and of course that by reading the whole book, I guess you've seen that is in a way his downfall, and of course it is the tension of the whole book. Um, but yeah, I mean, I like him as a character, and I like the fact that he is kind of my own kind of contemporary portrait of what attracts me to a character like Faust or Kay from Kafka's The Castle, or even going further back. I mean, I was looking at influence of like Oedipus or Job. These kind of the damned seeker is what I wanted to make out of him, and in this book, and I was able to kind of make my own kind of contemporary version of that. And of course, as I mentioned before, part of that was being younger and being pretty enamored by Twin Peaks when I was in my teen years, and this kind of intellectual detective of Dale Cooper, which is has its quirks and maybe a little more quirky than Sherlock Holmes himself, and Wind, Detective Jonathan Wind became my version of that.
Well, you mentioned some of the classical influences that you have in the book, and each chapter uh, contains one of these references. Uh, can you describe how you approach this? Because these classical influences, like Oedipus, today, when if you mention that, it's kind of a high-minded intellectual thing, whereas at the time, it was just a story, the same way
Mm,
that we'd watch any TV show, The X Files, you know.
mm,
So what is the relevance of the classics in kind of in a world where they affect all of our art,
mm.
but the originals are seen as something that we can't approach unless we're an intellectual.
I mean, and I think maybe if that is true, or the areas where that is true, I feel that that's kind of a maybe a sad state of affairs. I mean, the classics are, I mean, to reread them today underneath a great translator are just amazing literature, full of not just like wisdom and life lessons, but beautiful poetry. Like recently, I've been rereading the Oresteia and Aeschylus. One of my great loves, and it's amazing literature. I mean, there's this kind of darkness and the retellings of the Trojan War that you have in the first volume of that trilogy. But it's in the hands of Fagles or Lattimore, some of these translators, it should still pop off the page and be considered readable, great literature. And I think when people do give it that chance, they realize that's still there. And as you said, these old mythological stories, and we're just talking about Western stuff, but I've tried to read a range from around the world. They're influencing so much art and culture since that. we kind of do ourselves a disservice to not go back to them. And one of my favorite writers these days, Anne Carson. I mean, she brings that ancient world to life in such a wonderful contemporary way that I find myself even learning new words every time I read her. And so there are those out there who are trying to make sure that we don't forget this kind of heritage, be it Western or really anywhere from around the world, because it's great literature, great art is great literature, great art, no matter where it's from, no matter what time period.
Yeah, like I say, this is kind of one of my crusades, and what bothers me is when you read like the Thousand and One Nights, which is not quite Western. It's so powerful and so vital, and you even see echoes of it in I rewatched Tales from the Dark Side movie, where Debbie Harry keeps the little boy in the cage, and he keeps talking and telling her stories so he won't be cooked.
Oh yeah.
So these stories are a big part of us, and like you're saying, it just really bothers me that we don't see them as beautiful and as vital as they are, and I don't know why we put them on another shelf.
Yeah, I mean, like there's, when you get over, maybe the difference of style or the strange names, most great literature is so human that it's still something that can then easily speak to us once you give it a shot. I mean, I like to go back and reread, like the, the Icelandic sagas. And, once you get, used to the names and, someone being the child of this person, and that kind of the different tropes for that literature, it comes off the page and it's wonderful and it's beautiful. And you, forget that maybe that this was written, over 1,000 years ago. Same thing with, Tale of Genji, this amazing Lady Murasaki, amazing, maybe the first novel ever. And it's crazy and there's such weird stuff in it, but it's so beautifully human and it's still right there for us. It's, once people are kind of maybe forced to, or just, well introduced to something, and you push through maybe the first 50 pages tops, you're in these worlds and they can be really fulfilling.
Yeah, it's always funny. I worked at Ohio State. I tutored the student athletes, and they always have a reticence about something like Hamlet, but then you introduce it by saying, "Have you ever had do you have like a stepfather or a father figure that you're angry with?" And a lot of them are like, "Yeah, are you upset about something they've done? Yeah. Do you have a girlfriend who's kind of neglecting you? Yeah." So it's totally relevant if you introduce it in the right way.
hmm Yeah, I mean, like that's why those tales were popular in their time. That's why they've endured. And I mean, I'm all about expanding the canon also, and that's and there's a lot of wonderful stuff from around the globe and different time periods. I mean, kind of why I studied comparative literature, because the breaking out of even just the mold of a Western canon can be really valuable.
Oh, definitely. And that kind of brings me to another question I had. I would like to hear about your journey as a writer. Where did it begin? Where have you been?
Um, I mean, I guess the I've been making up stories since I was a child. It's kind of I don't know, always a part of me. I maybe spent a lot of time alone as a kid and with books. They were the worlds I'd go into. They were a place where, as my family maybe moved around a lot. The books were consistent. They were a world to revisit and then a place to take back out of those books into my own world. I don't know. I spent time playing alone, kind of acting out, plays and stories, things I got out of literature, things I got out of comic books. Not that they're not literature. So, I mean, I guess it was always there. And while I've had kind of maybe at different points of my childhood, different maybe career inclinations, I've always written, and it's always been something that I kind of couldn't help but do. Even like, even today, it's always the same kind of thing. I'm going through lines of dialogue in my head when I'm just kind of waiting places at the bank, or passing through my day. I'm constantly always picking at works, and it helps to finally be able to sit down and put the works together and have a clear project in mind, to filter all of that. And so that's often why, I'm pretty excited when I'm actively really working on a big novel, because I can bring all these different, threads and strands and voices together. Um, sorry for the rambled answer. It's just kind of always been there. I've always been coming up with stories and always trying to find a way to make them into a form that I can put out into the world.
Yeah, and you've gone to a lot of places to learn, and been in, for example, like we've discussed, you majored in philosophy at Manhattanville,
Hmm.
and you've been at the University of Georgia,
Yeah.
where you got your PhD. Uh, what is it like having so many different writing communities?
Um, well, it's tough. I mean, like, you hear these different quotes from different novelists about like one of the reasons why they like being a writer or being a novelist particularly is because maybe they're loners. They spend you got to be able to sit alone in a room with with the piece of paper and a pen, or with your laptop or your typewriter. Um, so the different communities I've moved through, I've usually just been doing the writing on my own and alone. It was actually not until I really, it took me a long time before I would even tell people that I was a writer, because I felt like until I had things published and could show proof of it, or proof of it that's been confirmed by others, that's had a stamp of approval on it, maybe, that I wasn't really a writer, or I couldn't really say this. So that took me a while. I mean, one of the reasons why I studied philosophy was because, one, I couldn't make up my mind for a discipline in school. And two, philosophy seemed to maybe get behind lots of different disciplines, of course. But then three, it provided me a place to have this kind of like general understanding while working on my writing. And my concentration was philosophy and literature. My master's in religion, and I focused on religion and literature, and then eventually the PhD in comparative literature. And all along the way, you know, trying to see these different ways of writing and going about putting ideas into form. Um, and so, I've been passing through these different kind of literary communities, these different disciplines, but never really been had too much of maybe like I guess, a writer's community around myself.
Well, yeah. How do we balance the solitary nature of what we do? Because it's all about, uncapping the fountain pen,
Hmm.
turning on Word, and pumping out ideas and words.
Hmm.
How do we balance that with the need to get ourselves out there in this crazy, insane social media world?
It's tough. I mean, like, I would very much like to, just write the books and, write the essays, the articles, the stories, the poems, and, just do that, and somehow they get out there. Somehow they get to an audience. Because, I mean, I guess we all want an audience. There, on many different levels. This confirmation that what you've done is itself literary, or is itself good, or is itself, worth saying, or contributing to a conversation. Um, so it's a tough thing. I mean, I guess I'm a naturally, outgoing or social person, though my chosen, um, medium of expression is kind of a solitude one. Um, an isolated one. Most of my artist friends are visual artists or musicians, actually. I do, I know lots of, writers, but it's not necessarily what we talk about. We talk about literature, but we don't generally talk about the practice of writing.
Sure. I noticed that your dissertation, it was titled "On Cultural Guerrilla Warfare: The Artist and Activism,"
Hmm.
in which you followed William T. Vollmann, Ai Weiwei, and Pussy Riot, the the collective of protesters, I guess you'd call it,
Hmm.
from Russia. What is the what is the artist's obligation in terms of affecting social change or commenting upon society, in your mind?
Um, I mean, politics is personal, and the artist is part of the world. I feel like I mean, it's as much an obligation as it is for any citizen, any individual, any human. The question that I look at throughout the dissertation and a lot of my work is it more so for the artist, or does the artist have maybe an extra, if not social responsibility, but then that second question of extra social maybe power to make change? That all humans, all individuals, all citizens are cultural participants and cultural actors to some extent. But um, when you choose the mantle of artist or it's thrust upon you, um, does that give you extra obligation and does that give you extra power, or does it give your voice extra weight, which then also in turn might mean that you have got extra obligation. Um, I'm I believe that as much as every individual, the artist also has this obligation to society, and so yeah, that's that gets at it to some extent. I think it's pragmatic to be compassionate, and we all live in this world together. So the most we can do to help out others and alleviate their suffering, the better.
What's the balance then in literature and in especially in the writing community between this beautiful necessity and power that we have and the need to entertain and bring people into the tent?
Mm. Well, I mean, there. That's I mean, one of my favorite films is Sullivan's Travels, and it's such a wonderful, Preston Sturges, such a wonderful film about, the entertainment versus serious art, and that, entertainment and maybe the palliative of art is useful, is necessary. People want comedy, people want to feel good, people need that, in a life in a world that is full of a lot of suffering. Um, you can also teach, through something that is entertaining, maybe sometimes easier. One of my favorite writers and filmmakers, the Senegalese author Ousmane Sembene. Um, he's the author of God's Bits of Wood, a wonderful, wonderful novel. He wrote books, and he started realizing that maybe a lot of his Senegalese countrymen couldn't read his books, and so he started making films so he could reach a greater audience. I mean, but he was also, an ardent, communist, and believing, that he had a social responsibility to help out through his work. And so, yeah, he switched mediums so he can reach a greater audience. If someone wasn't literate, they could see his film, and he could still, put light on social issues through his work. I've got a little note next to my desk right here, a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre that says, "The writer's job is to acquaint everyone with the world, so no one can claim innocence." And yeah, it's a line that kind of haunts me. I mean, it's one. It could just be very clear excuse for just writing naturalism, or journalism. But also this idea that that no one can claim innocence, and so it gives the responsibility to art to be also as wide and all encompassing as possible.
Sure. Like I say, this is kind of one of the things that I find really fascinating.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't know, and I teach a lot of freshmen. They're all smart, they're all awesome, and I just worry about losing even more ground with the culture at large
Hmm.
by making didacticism too much of an emphasis, I guess.
Sure. Uh-huh.
Because I don't I'm and like the my young adult book that's out currently is could be viewed as an issue book,
Hmm.
and it definitely would affect people in that kind of way. Like there is
Hmm.
a lesson, obviously, but I didn't write it that way.
Yeah.
And it's about entertaining, and you're going to learn the lesson. In,
Hmm.
in the same way Les Miserables does, where maybe he rambles once in a while, but Victor Hugo does not say you must love all people.
Hmm.
He shows you these people in the situation, tells you their characters, lets them interact, and then you realize, wow, why are we all jerks?
Hmm.
So
Sure.
yeah, so how do we reclaim readers? How do we reclaim people who may have turned away from reading?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the worry about didacticism, the worry about reaching an audience. One response is to say, well, that's the job of people in marketing. That's the job of the publisher, and the person in publicity. That's the artist, the writer. Their job is just to create the work. I mean, what you're bringing up is, you were describing how do I balance the kind of different polarities of my book and Wind Will Wash Away. And it's a tough thing in the marketing. I think once you read the book, it works. You don't read the book and go, oh, now he's giving you lessons about religion, and oh, now
Sure,
he's telling
sure.
the story. Um, but in order to market it, how do I sell this? Do I say, hey, you want to read a cool mystery story that's set in Atlanta? Or do I say to someone, hey, you want to read a book about destroying classical binaries of masculinity and femininity?
Yeah,
And
I worry that we're saying that too much.
Mhm. Well, yeah. So it's how do you so sadly, of course, we have to do this work. I don't know. Sadly, gladly, we have to do this. Self promotion and marketing, and I can maybe you choose your audience of how to talk about the work. But the work should be able to maybe when it's entertaining, if there's anything didactic in there, if there's anything to learn from it, that'll just be part of it. That'll just come along in the fact that people are reading or watching or looking at a good story. Um, but you're right. I mean, it's a tough thing, especially from the standpoint of an academic, from an educator, of trying to find the best point of entry to get someone not just to appreciate an artwork, but also to then think through it and beyond that artwork to its social relevance.
Do you feel that then a book must be an educational experience, that you must think of it in a critical fashion?
Um, no, I mean, like, sometimes I guess I've got one of those, you know, personas. I kind of just can't help that to some degree. And a lot of people are like that, and I can I can read a book and enjoy it, at the same time. It Yeah, I don't know. I guess I do read maybe more serious literature than technically quote unquote less serious stuff, but I watch a lot of bad TV. That becomes a respite for me.
Oh, I ask about that a little later, yeah. Um,
Sure.
yeah, I want to ask about because this is Great Writer's Steel, and we talk about uh, writing craft and how we do this. Uh,
Mhm.
in your book, And Wind Will Wash Away, you do a couple things that I wanted to ask about, just
Okay.
in terms of technique. On
Mhm.
page 26, Detective Wind is examining the apartment of the murder victim,
Mhm.
Flora. That's not a spoiler. It's in the beginning. It's the inciting incident.
Uh-huh.
And during the course of his investigation, he examines her bookshelf,
Mhm.
which makes sense. And obviously, I think we all understand that the goal of you describing what is on the bookshelf is to shape Flora's character, to help us understand her on some level.
Mhm.
Uh, but what I wondered was the list goes on for over a page of space, and I
Mhm.
was curious as to your reasoning and why you did that.
I mean, you've touched on it in what you just said. I mean, it is. I mean, to me, what better way than for me to show, especially since, as you said, of course, this second chapter and the character is dead already. She's this this victim here of this whatever this crime is. She's the deceased. So we know in this book, unless it's through maybe a flashback or a memory, we're not gonna see this character in the present of this book. But what better way to show you who someone is, at least from my standpoint of being the bookish person I am, than to show you everything that's on their bookshelf. I mean, when I go into someone's home for the first time, I look at people's bookshelves. I also look at their music. I look at their movies if they have their DVDs all together. Um, but yeah, I look at people's bookshelves, and it gives me an idea of maybe a deeper idea of who they are. So in this my own book, one, I do like lists a good bit too, and I like the art of using lists. Um, but yeah, so to show you pretty much everything that's on someone's bookshelf, I've given you this, insight into this character, and I've rounded her out for the reader here. And it's a page, it's a good solid, maybe a little more. You're right, of everything that's on her shelf. Yep.
And in terms of craft, you arrange it in an unbroken paragraph.
Hmm.
Did you consider? And obviously, I'm not judging. But did you consider making it maybe a bulleted list, or how did you make how did you choose the way to format it that you did?
Um, well, since the format of this book runs in a pretty much 19th century kind of standard novel style. I mean, there's a title and an epigraph for each chapter. But then otherwise, you've got, the standard paragraph, indentations and stuff. I kept it with that. I kept it in the flow of the action, as you saw. Like there's a colon, and then, semicolon, separating each of the entries of what's on her bookshelf. And of course, I like the fact that other than you've got the author's name and standard, but then you've got the italics on the title of the book, and it has a nice kind of appearance on the page. But otherwise, I kept it within the general same formatting of the work itself.
Okay, very cool. I do notice that in addition to that list, the paragraphs are often, I'm not saying too long, obviously, but many of the paragraphs are very long, and interestingly, much of the dialogue is done in very long exchanges,
Hmm.
in longer paragraphs. What were you thinking as you composed this dialogue? Why did you do that way?
I think again it goes back to this 19th century, novel form I've been mentioning. Dostoevsky. I mean, when I've described this book to someone as a religious book, I don't know. I live in the South. You say religious book, people think it's a Christian, some
Left
Christian.
behind.
And yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when I want to clear up what I mean by this, I'll often say like it's a religious book, like Dostoevsky, like Brothers Karamazov, and um, that also was something in my head and a model for what I was writing here. So yeah, so when you think too, like I've read everything by Raymond Chandler, and I've read some James Ellroy, and when I was thinking of maybe the thriller stuff I like, or the detective, noir fiction that I like, they're very brief, short paragraphs mostly, very, often clipped, terse speech, and I'm pretty much doing the opposite of that here. And even though it's a detective story, I'm still doing this kind of, 19th century novel thing.
Well, fascinating then. Obviously, I have my own ideas, but I'd love to ask you for the benefit of people who may not be as familiar as you are. You're definitely more familiar than I am. What are the qualities of 19th century literature that you both emulated and that you see the most?
Um, I mean, especially, when you think of, that I don't know, this trope that Dickens invented the mini series, these kind of serialized works. You didn't have you had the printing press, doing well and going strong, but you didn't have television, you didn't have that kind of entertainment. So these novels were big. They were worlds unto themselves. I mean, this book is only about 400 pages, but I was really thinking of that. These kind of books that contain lots of characters that are human, that come off the page, that are walking around, living and breathing, within the world of the text, and through their interactions and conversations, you're learning something, of the time period, the contemporaneous, world of Dickens, of Zola, of Dostoevsky, but you're also learning about whatever the theme or plot of that work is, what Dickens or Zola's intention was for that novel. Um, and also, this was my first novel, so I thought of where to go to how to write a novel. I'm going to look at these, maybe the peak of of the novel period. Um, and so yeah, so it felt really kind of comfortable for me to in plotting my way and figuring out how to do this, falling back on stuff that's often considered maybe the best of this um, genre form wise. Um, so yeah, I think that answers the question.
Oh, sure.
I mean, because there's a range too in there. You've got things of realism, naturalism, romanticism, and I wasn't making too much of a difference of that. I mean, I really like Stendhal. Charterhouse of Parma is one of my favorite books, and I like as I said, Zola, and so you've got still a range in there form wise, but I mean, I guess the thing within that is that you've got these containing a world. And that's kind of, and also a sense of place. I really feel like I know. I've never been to St. Petersburg, Russia, but I feel like I know it. When I'm reading like Crime and Punishment. I've been to Paris, but I feel like I know 19th century Paris, and I'm reading Zola, and it's the same thing for Dickens' London. Bringing those places, to life while these characters are walking about and moving about their lives. the social was part of those novels also. And I've spent half of my childhood in Atlanta, and I tried to you know put that into this book and make this also a book about place.
I think you definitely succeeded at that, and you definitely seem to know the place well. And you're currently in Atlanta, as I understand.
No, actually, I'm in Athens, which is
Oh, okay, yeah, I know the
about an hour.
Georgia area, the Georgia area.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason why I'm here. I started writing this book in New York and moved down to Georgia, moved back to Georgia, but moved to Athens to do my master's in religion as research for this book and to be close to Atlanta so I could get in for field work and interview people and, being able to describe location. But then also doing the master's where I'm kind of researching all the religious stuff, in Athens.
Very cool. Um, so I have questions that I generally ask people because, like I say, we like to get into the craft of writing.
Okay.
How do you generally compose your first drafts?
Hmm. Um, it's a different process for different things. I mean, for short stories, quite often I'll get an idea for a story and can sit down and just knock the whole thing out. And then when I come back through, that's often tweaking or fine tuning, cleaning it up a good bit. Sometimes I've just had like a not a perfect draft, but at least a first draft that is the story is down. Um, this book took me 3 years, and there was a lot of outlining, a lot of dossiers on characters, a lot of plotting and drawing of maps and stuff like that, and floor plans. And so when I sat down, would work on whichever different chapter felt most comfortable or ready to work on. Sometimes I wouldn't need much more than a first draft. I'm pretty into preparation, and so by the time I'm doing some of the writing, I'm what comes out is what stays. I also am always picking at things in a notebook, writing on scraps of paper, receipts. When I'm working food service, I'm writing on guest checks, and so then when I sit down at the laptop, I'm typing those things up, I'm adjoining those fragments, and then I'm going on from there. So my relationship to drafts is, I mean, I don't know how unorthodox it is, but my relationship to drafts is, I guess, just distinctly me. It's not like there's a first draft and a second, and then it's a constant kind of building, cutting, adding to a process until I feel like it's where it should be, or I've said what I need to say.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned the writing short stories in one go sometimes because of all the preparation. What do you think of the new kind of conventions that are, I guess, being forced upon to the short story by the internet? If you look at all the writers' guidelines, you'll see must be under 4,000 words, must be under 3,000 words. I think about someone like T.C. Boyle who writes a 9,000 word story that flies along and it's so cool and you're in this world. But now I worry that we're winnowing down to stories that it's much harder to make a substantive 2,000 word story.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I've seen that as you're talking about, but I've also seen people who've seen that don't like it, and so they have a backlash where they only want things that are longer form, and kind of one of the beauties of like a website, magazine or lit blog is that size is no object. It's not like a paper cost, So there are people who've rebelled against that. When I was going around just trying to get stuff published, I would pick a story of mine that I thought, is good or ready or should get out there. And I would just kind of scroll through, new pages and submission lists and go, oh, this one they only want 2,000 words or less. Well, that doesn't fit this story, but it fits this other one of mine. So I'll send that. So mostly I've just tried to, ignore it or work around it. I do like, some really short, wonderful stories. I mean, one of my Kawabata's, palm of the hand stories are wonderful. This, haiku version of a short story or prose poem or vignette. And then I like, novellas, or just a really good long short story. So, the marketplace, changes and we, see articles or studies worrying about people's attention spans. But big books still get published and long short stories still get published. So I don't know. I try not to let it get me down.
Yeah, definitely. A short can be. I just had a short accepted today. They
Oh yeah.
can be great, and there's plenty of great ones out there. I
Mhm.
always teach Reunion, John
Mhm.
Cheever's Reunion, which
Okay.
is a beautiful story, and it's 3 pages.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's all a matter of, I guess, what you do with the medium.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, that's I've liked some brilliantly huge long novels. And and then there's a world of novellas that I just love and say exactly what they need to and exactly the length that they need to. And um, this idea of anyone having these rules, that's stuff that like I just try to ignore outright. I mean, I've seen publishers who wouldn't accept a book that was written in third person, small presses that only first person, and I just quickly just put them out of my mind. I mean, I couldn't tell you who that was anymore, but
well, if it's an autobiography, I get it.
but even that, I mean, what
Yeah, I'm kidding. 'Cause, yeah.
some of Mailer's best writings is when he, disguised himself and wrote, these, the new novelty type things that were just for portage. But yes, I mean, I I get your joke, but also this fear though of like the idea of like an objective, omniscient third person narrator. I mean, my Wind book is very much just a third person narrator. Again, something that was pretty popular in
In the
the
19th
19th
century, yeah,
century.
yeah.
Sure.
Well, since you mentioned it, I'll point out that one of the things that struck me about "And Wind Will Wash Away" is the not a similarity, but what I felt was kind of a kindred spirit nature relationship with "Tough Guys Don't Dance," the
Mhm.
Mailer, because it was my understanding that he set out to write a literary mystery novel.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's I don't know, that's how it feels to me. So once you have a draft going, how do you? Obviously, it's always different, but how do you revise?
I want to revise. I mean, uh, well, I can give you the specific example of this book. I wrote this book. I finished it in 2005. I wrote it for 2002 to 2005. Um, all the research I did, all the drafts and writing, and through the different life changes that went on for me even during that time period, and tried to get it published. Couldn't, all these different things, and got distracted by again life. And so when I did find publisher Deeds, who's really great, and wanted to do this book based on liking my first published book, the novella The Pit and Other Stories. They wanted to do this book, and so I had the chance to look it back over 10 years later. 10 years greater wisdom, maybe.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, writing experience. And so this experience of revising was to sit down and read it, and anytime a sentence made me cringe in any way or raise an eyebrow, boom, cut it, either cut it out, or if there was anything I liked in it, chop it to salvage it. There were a lot of windy, windy sentences that I thought was, young, pretentious me thought was some good form following function. I was also really into Faulkner too, so there were a lot of these sentences that were maybe too big for their own good, and I chopped them. Either got rid of them entirely or cut them into smaller sentences. And it was a very freeing process. Younger me would not have been able to do it. I would have felt too close to it. I would have been too bratty about it. But now, especially with someone liking the book and wanting to publish it and doing such a wonderful job of publishing it, as you see, I I tried to live up to the work by respecting the work and being as good to the work as possible. So giving it its facelift, I was just brutal. Chop, hack, form, shape, and it was very freeing. Normally, I'm more of like a builder. I interviewed Tom Robbins once, and he said that he writes very slowly in one sentence at a time, and when that sentence is perfect, he moves on to the next one. And I'm not quite like that, but I build up as I go, and I'm kind of working on each bit as it's moving, and so there isn't so much like writing a whole new draft or like a big rewrite, and these kind of like I don't know, like major changes that will happen. I mean, part of it is my trepidation, part of it is laziness, part of being kind of obsessive and mulling over things a lot in my head. So I'm more building than I am, like a. I wish I could be like a sculptor and I could just like burst out tons of text and just pages and pages, and then sit down and just chop at it and work it down again, like I did with, this recent edit of this book. But I don't know, kind of the mixture of laziness and perfectionist. I'm much more of a builder, like, clay instead of hacking down stone.
Well, it must have been a cool experience to kind of edit 10-year younger you.
Mhm.
So what would you tell him?
Um, I would have, I don't know. I mean, like, I mean, it's, without being like, this is the best of all possible worlds, and if he hadn't made the choices he made, I wouldn't have been able to hack it to the state I think it's in now, and I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty great. I think it's the way it should be. I mean, I probably would have told him to relax a little bit. He certainly wasn't too worried about what other people thought. I guess that's a good thing. I constantly will read things I wrote when I was much younger, and there's like a purity, there's an innocence to, or at least in the nostalgia of the looking back of writing things where I go, wow, this reminds me of someone I hadn't read yet then, and now I get the association and how cool it was that I wrote something like that without having read that person or knowing that I was maybe referencing something. And that kind of just kind of what looks now to look back on as maybe kind of pure artistry is always kind of exciting back to go through. Where now I don't know, I'm much more maybe cautious and worrying too much because I've just read so much that I want to make sure that I'm not ripping somebody off or someone's going to try to call me out of something I didn't even think was there. Yeah, there was a little more reckless confidence in younger me that I miss a bit.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the same thing with me. It's hard to balance the kind of. I wrote way more when I was a teenager, 13 to 18, than I did after I started getting an actual education in writing,
Yeah.
because you have all those voices in your head, some of them valid and some of them not.
Hmm.
So totally different experience in writing.
Yeah.
We talked about your influences, and uh, obviously there's a wide range of them. So
Hmm.
I would like to know, since you mentioned so many timeless, beautiful works of art, what are some of your non-literary guilty pleasures?
Hmm. Um, I don't know. I do like um, I don't know. There's a lot of bad TV that's gotten into my life mostly from when I used to teach, and I'd like to put something on in the background, television wise, when I was grading, to have that kind of, you know, I could grade in 3 hours what might have been able to be done in one, but with TV on the background, maybe distracting myself a little bit from the students, papers and work. Gave me a little bit of a cushion of not being maybe too over judgy and over analytical in grading student writing. So I don't know. I would put on things like The Mentalist. I would put on a show thinking, oh, this looks like something dumb that I'll put on the background and I won't get into. And then the worst thing is you start getting into the show. Something that you thought would just be like just background noise, then you actually start getting involved. So there is a good bit of that. I had some pretty crazy dreams the other night because I fell asleep watching Criminal Minds on on Netflix. But yeah, there's that. And it's not necessarily a guilty pleasure. I like I like plot, and what television like that can offer is just these really kind of basics of plot writing. They're not always great, but you see just the basic rudimentary craftsmanship, and sometimes you're getting good things, good writing coming out of that stuff. So that might be some of my guiltiest pleasure there. And I mean, I haven't had cable in many years, but we've got Hulu, we've got Netflix, we've got Amazon Prime to watch shows. So yeah, I guess there's that.
Yeah, for example, I love Hell's Kitchen, even though I know it's all staged.
Hmm.
It's just fun to watch. The Cutthroat Kitchen. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've seen that one. That's a fun
Uh-huh.
show.
Yeah, I'm for some reason when it comes to especially like TV, like even reality stuff that I know, yes, it's not, really reality or whatever, but I always like having a narrative, around me, even if it's, pulpy narrative, even if it's not, I just kind of like having narrative. So my default, TV is often something that's, very obviously a scripted show. But yeah, the those kind of things, procedurals. I don't know. I can kind of like just rewatch The Office, the American one, even though like I struggle with all the problems I have with it all the time. But putting that on the background is weirdly comforting a lot.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Mhm.
So you live in Athens,
Yes.
which, as I understand it, is a really awesome artsy place. I'm thinking of REM
Hmm.
and I can't think of the other person or the other
Well,
cool
there's a lot of them. I mean,
the B-52s, right?
B-52s. I mean, Neutral Milk Hotel of Montreal. Drive-by truckers. I mean, there's been, what, three decades of solid, really great music coming out of Athens. Amazing music scene. Um, then there's also a great, visual arts scene. There's a solid, smaller, literary scene that goes on here. But as far as music and venues and bands, playing out all the time, that's rare for this country. I mean, there's also a really great food scene, which is for a town of about 130,000 people, it's a pretty great place to live.
Yeah, so my question then is, would you like to give a shout out to what I'm guessing is a cool local indie bookstore in Athens?
Well, of course, Avid Books just opened its second store in Athens. So Avid is this wonderful independent owned and run by Janet Geddes, a good friend of mine. It's her wonderful labor of love, Avid Books, and it's done so well and become such a wonderful part of its community, bringing authors and having such great author events that they've actually opened a second store now in Athens. That's just opening maybe today, definitely this week. Yeah, so Janet Geddes there, Avid Books is a wonderful thing and really boon for the community to have.
Very cool. So most importantly, what is next for Jordan Rothacker?
Right now I'm in a very exciting and scary place at once where it comes to writing. I've got multiple projects that I've worked on over the years, been picking at, and some are closer than others to being done, but I've got nothing that's maybe commissioned already or someone's asking for. So I've got that kind of awesome or at times crippling freedom of what to finish next, what to commit to, and I've been just kind of in a fun, wonderful, weird mix of reading projects. I'm not currently teaching, so there's nothing I have to be reading or have to be writing, and so I'm really just kind of wonderfully picking things up and reading bits of stuff here and there, and yeah, just kind of enjoying literature and enjoying writing for themselves. Yeah, it's a good thing. Feels good.
Oh, definitely. Well, I know that you do some work for We Heard You Like Books out of LA.
Hmm. Yeah, well, that's really just kind of helping out with some publicity. I really loved Jarek Kovac's recent novel "I Hate the Internet," and reached out and because it's a small press that he started with that book, and they've done more books since. So I just reached out and said that I really liked what they were doing, and if he ever needed any help. And so I did some publicity for two of their titles, Canley Stubrick by Mike Klein and Leonora Come Down from Augustine Aguilar. And it was really just kind of a wonderful thing to do, just to send out emails and help try to get tour dates and stuff for two writers of two really great books that from a small press that might not get that much attention, but they're wonderful pieces of literature that need to be out there. And it was just something that I really was excited to be a part of. I mean, everything that press has done has been great, and they're just going to do more great things in the future. So I was just happy to help out and be a part of that. I know I sent you Leonora Come Down. It's a exceptional work. I mean, especially as a debut novella, but amazingly intricate Baroque sentences and a wonderful kind of magic realism vision there, and such a wonderful contrast to Mike Klein's book Canley Stubrick, that is like a novella in verse and this kind of like stripped down language that feels ethereal. So yeah, it's just wonderful to kind of like what you do here, with this podcast and your website to help out good literature, find a greater audience, and I'm always happy to do that.
Oh yeah, no, we in a way, like it really is a community. I don't know if you know about Raw Dog Screaming Books.
No.
Yeah, they're a really cool independent publisher of science fiction and fantasy and genre stuff. But what I really love is that they've built a really nice sense of community with the authors. If you want to submit to them, they're happy to look at your book, but you need to get a number of points where you review a book on your blog,
Hmm.
and do kind of join the club.
Okay.
So I wonder if that's kind of the model for independent publishers. The Penguins and the Simon and Schuster, they don't have to do that.
Hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, like, and there are a lot of smaller blogs or literary magazines that are out there, again, doing the same kind of thing, just wanting to just bring good work, to light and to the audience. And so I think there's begins to be this relationship between small presses then and lit mags, and people look towards that more because they trust it, because often when there isn't that much of a capitalist imperative behind these activities, they're done out of either love and care, or because this work really is great and needs to be out there. And so it's easy to trust in that, that when there isn't like so much of a commercial motive, people are doing this work because they think they like it, and they think you will too. So yeah, there's so many wonderful small presses that I like too, that whenever they publish anything, I'm going to them because I trust them that they're curating something well. One of my favorite books from a couple years ago, Mira Corpora by Jeff Jackson. I saw, $2 Radio. Ooh, I love that.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah.
Yeah, so I see this book by them. It's got a great cover. What is this? I read it. It's awesome, and I met him at the reading at Avid Books in Athens, and then I sent him a copy of my book, and he liked it and blurbed it. So it's that kind of stuff, where you trust a small press because they're doing great work, and you trust maybe these small lit mags or blogs because they're, again, doing stuff they care about. So yeah, and that's a real kind of positive feeling from an industry that people are worrying about all the time.
Yeah, like I say, it's one of my biggest dilemmas. How do we get more readers? I want to make more readers and reach out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want us to be so insular sometimes. And these small presses are reaching out beyond people who have MFAs and are writing for each other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, when and a lot of these small presses, they let the author have a greater say. And they're letting authors, with that greater say, input into, cover design or formatting and caring about the book as a whole product, not just what's inside because they've already curated that, but also how the book looks and caring about, that. You could buy an ebook, but why would you buy this print book? Well, because it looks cool too. It looks cool. You're interested with this cover. You read the back, then you realize the writing is wonderful. And I think that, smaller presses can have that greater hands-on attitude.
Wonderful words to end on. That's Jordan Rothacker, author of And Wind Will Wash Away from Deeds Publishing. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Ken. It was great talking to you.
Just like I said, a fascinating conversation with a fascinating writer. Remember, that's And Wind Will Wash Away, a book from Deeds Publishing. Don't forget, visit greatwriterssteel.com for all of your writing craft needs. You got Twitter, you got the Facebook, you got the YouTube channel. Please follow, like, subscribe, interact with me. Remember, I'm the home of the Great Writer Steel Quick Craft, where you get a little bit of craft information in just a single image. We do it for you. So remember, this is Kenneth Nichols with Great Writer Steel. Shakespeare did it, so should you.